Okay, I'll apologise for the messy studio. Here we have on the table here a couple of Sigma art lenses placed in front of the A7RIII equipped with a 105 1.4 Sigma art and set up here aiming at the window frame itself through the lenses. You can see this on the back of the camera. And the reason I'm doing this is to demonstrate how the Sony aperture mechanism works. So all you need to do really here is just listen to it and watch the timing to understand how an AFS actuation of Sony autofocus and aperture functions here. Okay, we're looking at the camera screen here, and I'm going to just put my finger onto the shutter button and take first pressure. Right, note the time taken and the noise of the aperture closing down. You can see the depth of field changing as the aperture closes down to f16, the working aperture I've set on the camera. Right, okay. So that is the delay which you might encounter with an MC-11 adapter and a 105mm f1.4 lens set to f16. That's a huge difference. That's a lot of travel for the iris. Normally you might work at f1.4 and this will be completely missing. In fact, we can probably try that. I'll just set the... You may hear as I do this, that is the aperture motor changing the aperture. So we're now at f1.4. Okay. That's how long it takes to lock focus. And you'll see that the aperture isn't changing. Now try it, say at f8. 2.8. 3.5. I'm going to try it at 4. So you can see that this is not an instant action at all, because the aperture doesn't use a lever or an electronic or electromagnetic aperture like the Canon E or the Nikon E indeed. In fact, the Canon mechanism's been electromechanical since the 1980s. It uses basically a motorized action. So it's a very, very slow action. And this can be overridden by certain conditions. And it's not always constant. Sometimes it does act very quickly. I'm not able to get it to do that now. I was hoping to have it respond a little bit faster. But that delay is what you can be confronting when you're using the A7RIII. And it also does happen with Sony's own lenses. It's not actually a function of the Sigma lens and the MC-11 adapter. With Sony lenses, it can be a lot quieter. You don't hear the steps, the 1/3 stop steps as the lens changes. But if you aim the camera at your own face and do this, just look at it, you'll see the iris closing down quite slowly. This means that for single shots particularly, you're faced with a time lag, which some people think is to do with the flash or do with something else, but very often it's actually to do with a combination of the autofocus cycle, first part of that, and then the aperture closing down, and on top of that you can then get a pre-flash sequence for TTL flash. The whole thing can add up to about a second of lag if you're not careful. More commonly a third or half a second, or if you're very lucky down to a quarter of a second. And very often you would not be working at f16. That's unusual, but sometimes you would. it's an option you want to have available. At f8, you might be shooting in a street or something, in which case I would advise using maybe AFC, but that's a bit chaotic, or just using a motor drive mode, a sequence mode on the camera, which can solve some of this, but not all of it. Okay, I just wanted to demonstrate that because the Nikon Z or Z system may or may not use a similar kind of actuation. It would be quite a pity if it did, because Olympus, for example, doesn't do this. Olympus just snaps the aperture straight down. It doesn't have this motorized process. It uses an electronic setting much like Canon, and some Canon lenses, when fitted to the Sony, like the 40mm f2.8 STM, just snaps straight down. It doesn't do the gradual stepping at all. It's all down to the lens and the camera. And this Sigma lens, as Sigma have confirmed to me, because I sent them an earlier video, they have confirmed to me this is the correct behavior according to Sony's standards.